Land Use Advisory Committee to order. Before we get started, I'm going to do just the Dakota Land, Water, and People acknowledgement. Since this is the first time most of us are going to be gathered here for this Land Use Advisory Committee, I am going to read the whole acknowledgement. Going forward, every other quarter, I will read the acknowledgement. But in the meantime, it will just be just the first sentence of it, but for today, we'll read the whole thing. The Metropolitan Council acknowledges that the land we currently call Minnesota, and specifically the 7-county region, is the ancestral homeland of the Dakota Oyate, who are present and active contributors to our thriving region. As part of the Metropolitan Council's commitment to address the unresolved legacy of genocide, disposition, and settler colonialism, and the fact that the government institutions, including Metropolitan Council, benefited economically, politically, and institutionally after forcible removal of the Dakota Oyate. The Metropolitan Council is dedicated to instilling land, water, and people commitments in regional policy. These commitments support the Dakota Oyate, the 11 federally recognized tribes in Minnesota, Ho-Chunk Nation, and the American Indian communities representing over 150 diverse tribal nations that call the 7-county region home. For this one, we will go around, do some introductions. There's a lot of new faces here, including myself. I've met a handful of you that are here from the previous Land Use Advisory Committee. So I'll get started with introduction of myself, Diego Morales. I'm District 9, mainly in Anoka County, Chair of the Land Use Advisory Committee, also the Chair of the Investment Review Committee, sit on Housing Policy Plan Review Committee, Transportation Policy Plan Review Committee, alternate to the MAC, and sit in Community Development Committee. Little fun fact about me, got 2 little rugrats running around at home, 6 and 4. So in my free time, all I do is play with them. When people ask me, what are your hobbies? I got kids. Those are my hobbies right now. You know, but besides Met Council, my day job, and the kids, I don't do much for fun right now, except for that. And I'll let Angela introduce herself.
Hi everyone, it's good to see you outside of a virtual environment. I'm Angela Torres, I'm the Senior Manager of Local Planning Assistance, and I sit as staff for the Land Use Advisory Committee.
I'm Robert Kliski. I live in District 6 in South Minneapolis. A fun fact about me is that I work for the City of Plymouth, so I should know some suburb stuff too. I'm excited to be here.
I'm Bill Drosty, Dakota County Commissioner, and I was past mayor of Rosemount.
Hi everybody, Dan Walter. I'm on the Lakeville City Council, and I also used to be on the Metropolitan Council from 2005 to 11. So the building looks somewhat familiar. We bought it for $1 then, so back in the day.
Hey everyone, I'm Tom Key. I'm from District 1. I'm the mayor of Corcoran out in the western suburbs, and I've been doing that since about 2021, so excited to be here.
Hi everyone, Mai Chong. I'm Ramsey County Commissioner. I represent District 6, which is most of the east side of St. Paul. Ramsey County is our smallest geographically, and also our densest county. In addition to that, similar to you, Mr. Chair, I have two younger ones. They're pretty independent now, but in our pastime away from the screens, we have backyard chickens, and I took up gardening now, so I don't have much growing yet.
I'm Kathy Mokel. I'm an HR consultant, but I'm a former Shakopee City Council member. I currently serve on the Shakopee Public Utilities Commission. And I've been on this committee for quite a few years now. But it's nice to see all the new faces, so welcome.
I'm Lana Doolin. I'm a City Council member from St. Anthony. This is my 2nd year serving. I have been a long time member or serving on the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, first on the Citizens Advisory Commission, and now I'm on the board. And I enjoy being outside and getting kids outside and teaching them about nature.
I'm Gerald Bruner. I'm a Watertown Township Supervisor. And this is my 3rd term on the LUAC committee. I'm on the board chair of 2 Carver County boards, Board of Adjustment, and the Employees Appeals Board.
Hi everyone, I'm Dan Rowe. I'm the mayor of Roseville, representing District 10. I'm in my 15th year in that role, and I'm in my second term on the LUAC. In my spare time, I practice what I call tough love gardening, which is I don't do anything, I just make sure it's there.
Hi, my name is Beketa Julo. I live in District 9, where I represent Lincoln County. Just my background in architecture as BSc and urban planner, my master's, so I'm very familiar with the subject matter. So yeah, my free time I just like to play soccer.
I'm Sean Hayford O'Leary. I'm from Richfield in District 5. First meeting, so nice to be here. Prior to Richfield City Council, I served on the Richfield Planning Commission for 2 terms, and I also have a master's in urban planning. And my fun thing is I like bicycling, yoga, and gardening. So.
And I'm Sandy Dingle, and I'm probably the oldest hat in the room. I've been with the council for 25 years and on this commission as recording secretary for all that time. Fun fact about me, I was an elected official for 18 years. Up until 2 years ago, I was on the St. Paul Park City Council and served as mayor. And I'm happy to be here too, and happy to meet all of you, and I really appreciate all of you taking time out of your days and your schedules to volunteer and give us great feedback. It really helps the work that we do here a lot, so thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Everyone's had a chance to look at the agenda. Okay. Everyone's okay with the approval of the agenda presented. Also, approval of the March 2025 Land Use Advisory Committee minutes. Looking for a motion and a second to approve the minutes.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Second. All right. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Motion passes. Thank you. We got 2 information items today. We are just going to basically be going over everything that we've already touched on in this year, so everyone gets up to date on everything that's happening with the Land Use Advisory Committee, so that way everyone has an idea of what we're doing. Going first, we'll start with the Livable Communities Act program alignment with Imagine 2050 and program updates. We'll have Hannah Gary and Emily Sedan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having us at LUAC to give an update on the Livable Communities Act programs and how we are aligning those programs with Imagine 2050. My name is Hannah Gary, and I am with the Livable Communities team, and I'm here with Emily Seddon, also with the Livable Communities team. And before we dive into our program update process, we wanted to give everyone just a little bit of background on Livable Communities grants. LCA makes competitive grants to cities, counties, or other development authorities like an HRA or an EDA. The grants are meant to incentivize and support cities that are advancing projects that meet regional policy goals like housing choice and affordability, connecting housing and jobs to amenities, and creating equitable development outcomes. In order to be able to apply for a project in a city, the city needs to be enrolled in that LCA program. And to be able to enroll, cities need to adopt affordable and life cycle housing goals and pass a resolution with their city council. We do have a full list of all of our participating cities on our website if you're interested in looking at that full list. We currently have 78 cities and townships that are participating. And
That's something.
I know another. Oh, yeah.
Lake shelter?
Yeah, it was a lake
Great. Okay. Good to know.
Oh, you're not only.
Great.
Dan, maybe you will be staying on.
Yeah, I know. Stay down here.
This guy's called.
Yeah.
Don't have to do our presentation in the basement. So in addition to the requirements to enroll, in order to draw down funds, the city needs to have enough land guided for affordable housing, or ELGA. Some of you might have heard that term before.
So the Livable Communities Act program funds activities across the development continuum. That's one of the things that's made the program really popular and successful over the past 30 years. So we try to help cities shape their local development environment by adopting policies that support affordable housing. We help complete pre-development activities, land acquisition, site preparation, especially around environmental cleanup, and then a variety of construction and rehab activities. And that falls for all projects that are rental, affordable homeownership, or have a significant jobs component. So we operate on an annual cycle. At the beginning of every year, the council approves the fund distribution plan. That includes our scoring criteria, how much money we have available to give away. And then we have kind of 3 different times where we're accepting applications for different activities, and in the spring, summer, and fall. And then, of course, throughout the year, we're working on outreach and providing technical assistance to cities, because we know development projects often take a really long time to get off the ground. And so this cycle may shift with the program update that we're talking about, but this is how our current operations work.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question about this? Do you provide the assistance to the cities or the municipality, like the government level, or do you provide it to directly to the developer?
That's an excellent question. We do both. So the city often is the applicant to the program, so they have to be the one actually pushing submit. But it is often the developer that's doing a lot of the writing of the grant, right, has all of the materials about what's planned, and so we'll work with both, but honoring that relationship where the city is the grantee, so they have to be that final kind of approval for the project.
Okay, great, thank you.
And if any of you have any more questions, feel free to ask. Typically, a lot of the Met Council meetings are very formal right now. This is just to catch everybody up with what the Land Use Advisory Committee is doing. So if you have questions, just feel free to ask the presenters. You don't have to refer to me for these two, just so we can get through as much as we can and ask all the questions that you do have. Thank you.
To give you a better idea of what LCA funds, we have 2 project examples that we'll go over with you. So this is an affordable housing project that was designed to serve families who had had recent interactions with child protection services, had been unhoused, or were experiencing some kind of housing instability. And the project included several family-sized units, which we usually consider 3 bedrooms or more, below 30% AMI. And in 2025, 30% of the area median income for a family of 4 would be making $39,700 annually. So that just gives you a better idea of who is being served by these 30% AMI units. And the engagement process for this project included families in the neighborhood who had experienced housing instability, and they also worked with service providers to give recommendations on building design and programming. And next, this is an initial development that's part of Brooklyn Center's larger opportunity site redevelopment. This project included an event center with 24-hour childcare and an academic learning center in one building, and then also had 60 units of deeply affordable housing, also with those family-sized units in another building. And the city has been really involved in the engagement for this project. There's a larger vision for the site to create an environment that's a little bit friendlier for people who are walking, biking, or rolling, and also includes affordable housing that's connected to amenities that are going to be on this site. So over the past 30 years, the council has deployed over $553 million through more than 1,400 grants through the Livable Communities Act program. In the last 10 years alone, we've helped create more than 20,000 affordable housing units, nearly 9,000 market rate housing units, and more than 18,000 living wage jobs, as well as increasing the region's annual net tax capacity by more than 53 million. And help shape and grow the region's transit-oriented development. And so why are we trying to change a good thing is kind of the question we often get when we start this. And this has really been a multi-year process around updating the Livable Communities Act program, driven by 3 factors.
First is ensuring that the program continues to be impactful and a tangible way to demonstrate the council's priorities. The second is to ensure that the current and potential grantees' experience with our program is really positive. And third, we've been laying the groundwork to align the program with the new regional development guide, Imagine 2050, which we knew would be adopted this year. So while we've made some program updates kind of annually as part of our cycle, what we wanted to talk today more about is that longer process of aligning the LCA program with Imagine 2050. Where we holistically examine the program, test and challenge our assumptions, and we will eventually be recommending a program design to council that will maximize the benefit over the next planning decade. So we're hoping that that program design will be ready in the fall for the council to look at. And so we're really grateful for everybody's input through this process because it's been a lot of engagement.
Go ahead, Jared.
What is a living wage job? What do you mean by that?
That's an excellent question. So we are using, this year I believe it's $59,000 annually, $700 annually.
185% of the poverty level is what we look at to make that calculation. It's a bigger question.
We've qualify for housing at that level or whatever? 185%?
It depends on your family size. So the income, excuse me, the income limits are determined by the size of your family. So if you have a family of 4, the income that you would need to qualify for 30% AMI, 31 to 50, 60% or more would be different than the income that you would need for a single person looking at like a studio apartment. So it really depends on the size of your family.
And we do have those affordability calculations made annually available on our website too, so we can make sure that those links are shared.
Yeah, those are set by HUD. How do we design these programs? There are a lot of different things that go into creating the Livable Communities programs. The goals and the priorities for LCA are defined in statute, and that was set in place in 1995. We have the Imagine 2050 Regional Development Guide that Emily was talking about, and then we also have our council's strategic plan that runs through 2023 to 2027, I believe. And Imagine 2050 had a very robust community engagement process prior to being adopted. So we're looking at a lot of that engagement and that policy direction as our foundation for LCA and this update work that we're doing to align the programs with Imagine 2050. We also incorporate feedback as much as we can annually. So on that slide that you saw earlier, we do interviews, we do focus groups, we have an annual survey that we send out to all applicants. And we have now had 4 conversations with city staff, developers, and county staff specifically around this program update. And we'll give a little bit more detail around those conversations later on in the presentation. So we take all of these inputs and then we work to operationalize those goals and priorities into the grant programs and then recommend a design to the council. And we are bringing our recommendations earlier this year than we typically do so that we have a much longer lead time to be able to do technical assistance and outreach with cities and developers across the region, letting them know about program updates that we're making.
So as you probably guessed from the name, at its core, the Livable Communities Act program funds local action and projects that make communities more livable in alignment with our regional goals. And so this mission really centers our work around being expansive enough and acknowledging that the work that we do looks different city by city. Livability looks different by city. That's kind of why we have the asterisk next to livable, right? Like, it's a word everybody knows, but it's a big word. And so it also, this definition of our program really also centers our work as an incentive grant program. We have about $29 million a year to work with, so it's a limited amount of funding. It's not enough to build an entire building in many cases. And so with the limited resource, we need to really focus on advancing projects that drive towards our shared regional goals of livability in areas where without our investment, the projects would either be really delayed or not completed at all. So how does the council fund our livability for the Livable Communities Act program? We start with our definition in statute, which combines housing, compact, efficient development, and living wage jobs as the three pieces of livability. It also acknowledges that we're operating in an ecosystem that includes connections with transit, employment areas. It asks us to think about intensifying land use, to create mixed income communities, and to look at areas where we're making infrastructure investments. With this statutorily defined livability standard, we also then layer that with Imagine 2050 and the work that we did there. So in Imagine 2050, equity and inclusion are really the foundation of that plan, and so we add that into our work. We have a goal around dignity and well-being to make sure that everybody in our community is supported. Our communities are dynamic and resilient, especially around areas of choice and access and affordability that relates really closely to housing. And the Imagine 2050 plan also challenges us to address climate change as a leader, mitigating greenhouse gases, and to protect and restore our natural systems. So this is kind of a dizzying graphic that looks a little bit like an onion, and that's where this program design and engagement work comes in to help us focus within this on where our 29 million can be most effective.
So like Emily said, we have limited funds. We can't fund it all, so we're using a lot of external input to refine the elements of what we mean when we say that we fund local action and projects that make communities more livable. So as we mentioned, over the past couple of years, we've been doing interviews with city staff, county staff, and developers, and then we've also hosted these 4 conversations with a mix of city staff, county staff, and developers to really focus on what does livability mean to you. So to try to get a sense of what livability means in different contexts around the region for different folks. We invited staff from cities who apply often, who don't apply often, and who don't participate in LCA. We have invited staff from all 16 districts across the region to make sure that we're getting a broad range of perspectives and different development contexts. So far we've talked with city staff from Blaine, Brooklyn Center, Richfield, Minnetonka, St. Paul, Dakota County, Minneapolis, Eagan, Chaska, and Maple Grove. Excuse me, and the goal of these 4 conversations, like I had said, is to really hone in on that definition of livability and also understand barriers that communities might face to try to make their communities more livable. So that we can set these high-level goals that are both honoring the local context, local development context, while also being aligned with our regional goals. So rather than only looking at outcomes like housing units or the number of jobs, we wanted to take a more people-centered approach to the way that we looked at our programs and really focusing on what livability means for people across the region. So we're using the feedback from these conversations in our program design process, and we are going to bring some early program design concepts to the council in early July. And each stage is informing every subsequent stage, so we don't have a lot of details about where we'll be later on in July because we have to see what feedback we get through the next round of engagement that we'll be doing, because it's really important to us that the external engagement that we're getting is driving the way that we design our programs. We also are going to have a public comment period at the end of the summer, and we can work with Angela to make sure that that information gets out to this group, and we'll be sending that to over 700 people that we have on our contact list. So what have we heard from these engagement sessions? We have heard that change does not happen in a vacuum. And just because the Met Council names something as a goal, it doesn't mean that the city can immediately implement it. Or just because city staff see the value in something, the public or elected officials might not be on the same page around that. So cities need us to support them in setting the conditions to build livable communities. We have heard a lot of appreciation for our policy development grant program and the desire to have larger grants around that and expanding the eligibility into small area plans or program development. We also heard 3 main themes that people think of as making a community feel livable. So the first was choice in housing and transportation. This aligns with our Imagine 2050 goal to create a dynamic and resilient region with choice, access, and affordability as drivers of that goal. We also heard about the importance of safety, both physical, mental, and cultural safety as part of a livable community. And this directly relates back to our Imagine 2050 goal that our region is healthy and safe, equitable, and inclusive, and a place where all people feel welcome, included, and empowered. And the third theme that came out across these conversations was the ability to meet your daily needs in your community, from going to school, getting access to healthcare, or having retail options. And participants from cities where residents often go to another city to meet their daily needs talked about the strain that puts on their tax revenue and then further hindering their ability to pursue projects that might make the city feel more livable for folks who are living, working, or recreating in that city. And this again aligns with 2 Imagine 2050 goals to make our region more dynamic and resilient and ensure communities are healthy and safe. And finally, we've been hearing from cities about the importance of using LCA to demonstrate creative solutions to meeting local needs. So working within those regional goals, cities and developers want LCA to help them think of creative ways that work within their local context. And then finally, everything that we're doing is going to be grounded in racial equity and justice. That's a very strong theme in Imagine 2050 and is a theme that we are constantly coming back to as we're going through this program design process.
So as Hannah mentioned, our staff is working on the program design at this very moment, including meetings today, about what the projects will fund in alignment with our goals. And so there's still a lot that's undecided, but we did want to share kind of what we have more firmly about the direction we're heading. So first, we know that the guiding equity statements and transparency statements from Imagine 2050 are really important to our internal processes, and we're holding those throughout. And second, we know some about what we will fund. So we intend to keep funding activities along the development continuum because it is so popular and we keep hearing that in our community feedback. We know that we will fund affordable housing every year. That's no question, it's written into statute. We also know that we'll fund environmental cleanup every year. That's also written into statute. And then there's a number of activities identified within the housing policy plan in Imagine 2050 that direct Livable Communities Act funding. So for example, into affordable homeownership opportunities. So we will follow the direction in Imagine 2050. We also have some shared goals from our work as a team and with consultants who worked with the Community Development Committee and our team about how we will do this work. So we will be ensuring that Livable Communities Act funding is in alignment with the other council grant programs. We're one of the few that's annual, so that's great. We will also be prioritizing simpler processes for grantee access to our programs. And we are focusing on data-driven solutions and being responsive to needs and as the development environment changes. So before we go into some discussion with you all and get your feedback, we just wanted to put the timeline up here a little bit more visually. We've kind of talked about where we're headed, but we are in the process of program design and doing external engagement to get feedback on the work. In July, we are planning on having another session with the Community Development Committee, so to get some more update there. And then hoping that by this fall, we have the overall structure for how the program will look in alignment with Imagine 2050 moving forward for the CDC and Council's acceptance. Because we want to begin that outreach and technical assistance knowing that the program could look different than it does this year. And then finally, kind of keeping with that annual cycle we mentioned at the beginning, in February of next year, we expect the council will continue to approve the annual fund distribution plan. So we'll know exactly how much money then is available for the programs.
So we've given you a lot of information, and before we jump into discussion, we just want to see if there are any more general questions that you have for us that we can answer.
Could you tell, I think you mentioned it, could you tell me the cities that you gave grants to?
So those are the cities that we have talked to through our first round of external engagement, not all
Well,
of them.
just give me a rough idea of where does the money go? Does it stay in Minneapolis, St. Paul, or does it get spread around through the 7-county metro area?
We have a pretty broad distribution of the funds. It varies a little bit by program. So for example, our TDRA program is focused on cleanup, and there's more cleanup need in the core cities. Our policy program is specifically designed for smaller cities further out of the metro. So we actually have a scoring component that rewards cities with lower net tax capacity. TOD program is in TOD areas. Those tend to be concentrated more in the core cities. And then our LCDA program is the one with the broadest geographic distribution. And I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I can, if you want specific numbers.
No, just roughly speaking. I got another question, nobody else. Why does the Met Council spend money for housing on cleanup? It seems to me you should be all spend it more on building units, to me.
So that's the way that the statute was written, is probably the best answer that I can give you. It's primarily environmental cleanup. So if there are sites that would not otherwise be able to have housing built on them, it's kind of the preparation to get to the place of being able to build housing. But specifically with cleanup, that was the way that the statute was written in 1995.
Oh, I see. So unable to build on, it may be a dump or something that you have to clean up.
Exactly, yeah, it's all some kind of contamination remediation.
So I have a question for you. Are the applicable, can a building be repurposed, or is it just new construction that you are looking at funding?
Great question. Buildings can be repurposed, so we leave it completely up to the developer in the city that's working on the project, what makes most sense. So it could be rehab of an existing building just to improve the conditions, or it could be, converting a building that had a different use into housing. All of those would be eligible.
And let's say a developer came to the city and said, hey, we want to take this former business site and transition it into affordable housing. Is that something then the city would move forward with the developer looking at an opportunity to apply for a grant?
Yeah.
But it's the city, I believe you said, that's the ultimate responsibility for taking on that.
Yeah.
So our legal relationship, our grant agreement is with the city itself. And then typically the city will have some kind of sub-agreement with the developer. But through the application process leading up to the grant being awarded, we have a pretty close relationship with both the developer and the city for most cities.
That's actually a great question, because Minneapolis and St. Paul are repurposing a lot of their commercial buildings to affordable housing, but I take it we haven't had many applications for livable communities for that since it just started last year.
Not in Minneapolis or St. Paul that I can think of right now. We had a series of a lot of bank repurposings coming through for a while. None of those come to mind right now.
Thank you.
I have another question, specific to the environmental piece of it. It's just about the cleanup of that site, right? It's not about incentivizing a developer to have green policies in their building. Is that right?
So that is part of our scoring. And that's one of the things that we're looking at with our program update, is how do we want to balance out a lot of those priorities. With having affordable housing, the more environmental measures that you bring in can sometimes make it more expensive. Also, climate change is very important. It's a big part of our Imagine 2050 guidance. So environmental sustainability currently is part of the scoring for the majority of our programs, and we have funded even through our policy program. And there was a city that was turning their environmental sustainability plan into, they were taking some of the things in their plan and turning those into ordinances. So we helped support that to give their plan a little bit more teeth, make it enforceable. So the other programs don't necessarily do the environmental cleanup, but there are incentives in all of the programs currently for things like green building materials, having stormwater management, including native plantings. It just kind of depends on the context of the project.
More questions?
Okay, we have some discussion questions for you, just to kind of get a sense from all of you, get some feedback on the direction that it looks like LCA is going. So we're curious, with those elements of a livable community, really looking at housing and transportation choice, safety, and the ability to meet your needs in your city. Do those seem in line with how you think about livability? Is there anything missing? Are there things that should be more narrowly defined? And then looking at the program design with the broad goals and the guardrails that we have, are those in alignment with land use goals that you would have as the land use advisory committee? Is there anything missing? And I recognize now that this is the first meeting for a lot of you, so if you don't have a lot of specific input on that, that is more than okay.
I just wanted to understand, as part of defining livability, do we talk about what you can do within your community? Is that including employment opportunities as well? I didn't hear that highlighted in the presentation, but I kind of presumed it was and was going to highlight it if it isn't. But to me, that's something that I know in our community we talk about, is making sure that there's a range of employment opportunities as well as a range of housing opportunities. So hopefully the two can align for people, as well as obviously the transit and transportation to connect everything.
Yeah, that's a great point. It is something is included in our program, and it often doesn't come out as strongly as the housing component, but we are working to make sure that job training is still an eligible goal towards the project. I think the tricky part comes where we're funding physical development most of the time, and so that looks a lot easier with housing sometimes than it does with jobs, and so, or it's a little bit of a clearer path, and so I think that'll be something we continue to navigate over the next several years.
I think one of the challenges we've had is that we tend to be a place where people go to work. We don't always have the housing that maybe matches with the income levels of people who are working in our community, and as a result, they have to take transportation of various types to get there, which adds cost to their living and makes their life, more complicated and more time spent in commuting and things like that. So, trying to match needs for people in terms of housing who are already working in the community and maybe coming from somewhere else, that's something we think a lot about.
Do we weigh employment opportunities as a benefit for LCA program? I think that's what Dan's referring to, is like the more job opportunities that are in a certain area, does that weigh differently than if you go to a different geographical area where there's less job opportunities? Does that weigh in on who gets the grants?
Currently, the specific location of the employment opportunities does not weigh into how we score the grants. We're really looking at we look at the number of living wage jobs that are being created or retained. We look at opportunities for wealth building through ownership of the site, through any kind of the business model, and then we also look at workforce training. So how is this project going to be creating more opportunities to potentially get into living wage jobs, higher wage jobs? But right now, the specific location of those jobs is not something that we score on.
So that's excellent feedback.
Yeah, we're taking
I'm
notes.
gonna piggyback off what Dan said too, because it also goes with educational opportunities, because Shakopee, we have a lot of manufacturing, but for our manufacturing companies to send somebody to school, they're going to Rosemont. And so then we're also talking about transportation and all of those pieces of it. So are there incentives to make sure that our community can have those opportunities for our businesses?
City of Watertown is, I'm not privy to all the information, because I don't live in the town, I live in the township, but somebody wants to put up like a 160 unit apartment building for low income. Would there be any grants from you guys for that project? If there is, give me the info and I'll give it to you.
We would love, we'd love it.
Yeah, for an affordable housing project, one of the main things that we look at is affordable housing. So we kind of, affordable housing and living wage jobs are now weighed equally within our scoring criteria. 160 units is quite a high number of units. So I think maybe we can share information with Angela to get you contact information, or our contact information is in the presentation as well. And if you want to reach out, I'd be happy to set up a meeting and talk through that project specifically, or get in touch with city staff or the developer who are working on that project.
Okay, so the answer is yes?
Yes, so
All right, then Angela, you want to give me that information? Well, you know, there's a great need for things like this because a lot of people work in bars, restaurants, grocery stores. And I know for a fact, because I know somebody that works in Laconia, McIntoons, they have to live in Hutchinson because there's no affordable housing in Laconia or anywhere close. And so I think the project in Watertown, I think it's a good thing. I've always supported low income housing. But I sense that there was trouble with the finance part of it. So that's why I asked the question. And so I could get that information, I'll pass it on to the city.
Thank you for that.
I just had a question about how you measure equitable and inclusive in your work and where you choose to invest.
That is a great question. So when we were starting this process, we actually had started the process focusing on more on outcomes, and then took a step back and realized that we were really focusing on process. We were focusing on outcomes. We weren't focusing as much on people. So we made a list of who we wanted to prioritize. So kind of a who benefits list, and have been looking at our criteria that we're working with in comparison to who benefits. So as we go through, I think this is kind of going to be more of like a monitoring than an evaluation component, at least for the first few years. So we'll be looking at who's the developer for the project, like who's actually getting money out of this, who's being served, who's getting jobs, and monitor to see if the projects that we are receiving are in line with this list that we had made of who we wanted to prioritize rather than what we wanted to prioritize. So right now, that's how we're looking at it. It's hard to have more of an evaluative component currently than a monitoring component, but that's the way that we're approaching it.
And I would add currently in our program scoring, we ask the applicant to describe their community engagement and process to getting towards design and the building, depending on what stage they're at in the development, they may be further along in that than that or not. But making sure that they have a thoughtful and inclusive process for getting community input into what's being built.
One of my thoughts and one that the county has been discussing too is around of course developers, and we built a pipeline of like emerging and diverse developers with experience of like, you know, not the typical large developers and the nonprofit ones, right? But then ones who have just one or two development, I think ours was upwards to 5 projects for them. They were still considered emerging developers. The other part of it is I've been pushing our staff, and they've done a great job in thinking about this too, is like Met Council already has like a map of like our social vulnerability index that layers in on that investment that where traditionally we haven't invested in, and that's where it's just created areas of like, you know, concentrated poverty. So those are some things that I would encourage you to consider too in this equitable and inclusive piece, because those are areas in which it tells us that it's been long disinvested in.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we've heard related to the emerging developers piece consistently is that smaller projects don't compete well in our current program. And so, and if you're just starting out in the development world, you're not building the 160 unit affordable housing complex. And so as we're designing this next program, we are trying to make sure that we can fund both more evenly.
Go ahead, Lana.
So I have a question. So I think this is great. Your question about is this the right kind of guardrails? I think this talks a lot about your foundation and your principles and your process. Will you also bring forward that selection criteria? Because you only have 29 million, and a lot of the things you're talking about, it's like, yes, I think all knowing what elements you're trying to prioritize, I think is helpful. I know in Imagine 2050, it talked about co-benefits across multiple dimensions, and I gotta believe that's part of your criteria, right? How many buttons does it tick?
Yeah.
I think it would be good to see what that scoring and your criteria is.
Sure. We hope to have later this summer kind of we're calling it our 90% draft ready to go, so we can work with Angela and Councilmember Morales to figure out the best way to share that information with you all as well if you're interested.
And that's going to be the focus of our next round of external conversations, is we're going to be talking with city staff, developers, and county staff, and we're putting more of an emphasis on emerging developers to better understand what about our scoring criteria might have unintended consequences of excluding folks. So our next round of external conversations is really going to be focusing on those scoring criteria and getting a better sense of, are we prioritizing the right things? When we look at more of the subjective, like how well is the project doing this? When we look at the project process, are we looking at the right things? Are we prioritizing the right things? And using a lot of that feedback that we get to refine the draft scoring criteria that we have now, because it's easy for us to sit in our office and think about like, well, this would make a perfect project, or this would be the perfect city. But the developments don't happen in a vacuum, so it's really important for us to have this process be driven by the people who are going to be applying to our programs.
Sean?
Yeah, I was curious, given the like climate change and environmental goals, do you have any criteria specific to like discouraging driving or promoting alternatives? Particularly wondering if like higher parking would, or excessive parking, particularly in an inner metro project, would score it lower. And also I'm curious about urban design features, things like having a pedestrian entrance or direct like actual design of the building that promotes access to transit.
So currently, we have a TOD program, and that's the focus of that program. So that program is really looking at how well connected the project is, how the project is situated, is it easy to get to transit based on where the door is. We are going to keep elements of connection. We know that going forward, especially with the feedback that we heard around choice in transportation. So I think we don't have specific criteria outlined right now around connections. But there will be an element of connecting to transit, connecting to trails, giving people options for transportation.
Okay, and then again, is high parking a negative scoring factor, or is that a factor at all?
In TOD, yes, it is currently.
But not for the other projects?
We haven't defined our criteria yet for, not for other projects currently, not outside of TOD specifically.
Okay, thanks.
Just a quick question about just back to the livability concept. Like, is there any proximity standards that has been considered in this program? Like how far one community should go from house to the amenities, and there is a 5 minutes, 10 minutes community concepts out there for applying. So how did you guys consider that?
Yes, we have considered that, and that's one of the things that we're kind of currently trying to define is when we say like bringing new services or amenities to an area, what is an area? So one of the things that came out in this first round of conversations was people wanting to be able to stay in their city to recreate, to work, being able to have choice in like a grocery store. And depending on where you live, accessibility can mean different things. It could be a 1 mile walk, it could be a 10-minute drive. So that is something we're considering, but we don't have a specific definition of how we're going to be measuring that yet.
Are open to suggestions.
Yes, that was a conversation we were having earlier.
If you have an
today.
idea of how to measure it, yeah.
Anybody else have anything else? No? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Up next, we got the Small Communities Planning Program and Planning Assistance Grant Program. Merritt Clapp-Smith and Angela. Oh, she's already here.
I do tend to stay here when I'm presenting, just so I don't have to move over different places, but wait till the presentation pops up. So as I mentioned, I'm Angela Torres. I'm the Senior Manager of Local Planning Assistance. Local Planning Assistance really works with local governments to provide technical assistance, technical resources for primarily the local comprehensive plan, but we also work on environmental reviews and many other things. I'm here with Merritt Clapp-Smith. She's a senior planner on the team. She's also the project manager of the Small Communities Planning Program. She's been doing the bulk of the analysis that you'll hear about today. She's the smart one of the two of us. So I also want to emphasize too, these are just 2 of our technical assistance programs. We have a slew of kind of a toolkit of all kinds of things, including specific staff that work individually with local governments. Like I said, this is just 2 of the things that we are talking about as we shift to implementation of the regional development guide. So I will just quickly share some background about the Planning Assistance Grant Program. It is an existing program, which is why we have background on it. The other program is brand new. I know some of you are probably well versed in that because perhaps your communities have been a recipient of those grant funds. For others, this will be an introduction. Merritt will talk about the analysis and potential updates to the eligibility criteria for the planning assistance grants, but also potential eligibility criteria for the Small Communities program. I'll wrap it up by sharing some next steps and timeline before we do have a few discussion question prompts. Sometimes the discussion is organic, and that's just fine as well. Just to reiterate, this is one of the items that we did start these conversations in January, and then we're back in March. The Land Use Advisory Committee is where this work has originated. So when we kick it off every 10 years, it always lands here first before we kick it to the CDC. And so I just wanted to make sure that we did a summary and a reiteration of all of this, because we will be asking later this year for there to be actual decisions and votes on criteria to move this from this Land Use Advisory Committee into the Community Development Committee. I do also want to say that we've really appreciated the contributions of our Veteran Committee members. It's been invaluable to have our initial conversations, and they've really helped us get to this point. But we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable voting on a recommendation, and so we're just here to start over a little bit. So just to start with, what authorizes the council to do this work? We have statutory authority. The Metropolitan Planning Act is the legislation that not only originates the Metropolitan Council and talks about the council's overall mission and mandates, but it also identifies local planning assistance specifically. So statute enables the council to provide planning services and to assist with local comprehensive planning, but it also identifies the purpose, which is being primarily for local comprehensive plans, fiscal devices. Some of you at the that might be elected officials might be familiar with capital improvement plans. That is a fiscal device, and then official controls like subdivision or zoning ordinances. Statute also enables the council to provide grants, loans, or other types of assistance in updating for local governments in updating their local comprehensive plans. That provision of assistance is based on demonstrated need and resources, and it is up to the council to determine how we assess demonstrated need, and that's been a large part of what the conversation has been so far this year. What does need mean this time around? So I'll just give some quick background on the Planning Assistance Grant Program. So the Planning Assistance Fund has been used to provide grants to eligible communities in previous comprehensive planning rounds to assist with the updates that are required by statute every 10 years. This table shows the funding categories and communities served in the past 2 planning rounds. The rows show the types of communities that were served. The columns show the number of grants and funding levels provided for both the 2030 plans and the 2040 plans. Local governments, I know sometimes we skip around with numbers of years all over the place. 2030 was 2 cycles ago. Right now, local governments are implementing their 2040 plans, and that was the plan that was adopted about 10 years ago. So during the Regional Development Framework, which was done in 2030, about 50 local communities were eligible for grants, and the funding awards ranged from $15,000 to $50,000. During Thrive MSP 2040, which was the most current one, 70 communities were eligible for funding ranging from $10,000 to $84,000. The 3 county and consortium grants supported comp plan updates for 33 townships and rural centers in Dakota, Scott, and Carver counties. I'll just say to kind of set the stage, both Scott and Carver counties still hold land use planning authority for the townships that are within their boundaries. Not the cities, not the municipalities, or not the cities, but just the townships, which is why Scott and Carver County you will often see as having a larger grant award because they have many more communities that they work with. The consortium comes from the Dakota County small communities and many of the townships who have over the past 2 planning cycles kind of gathered together for cost efficiency and said anybody that wants to join us in Dakota County is welcome to, and there was a large number of communities that did that, and there was a lot of cost effectiveness for those small communities in Dakota County for that purpose. This map shows the communities that received grants in the 2040 planning cycle. You can see the county and consortium grant communities that I was talking about in blue. The Carver and Scott counties will continue to receive a grant, and the small rural Dakota County communities have the option to do a consortium grant again if they wish. They aren't obligated to do that, but that is our understanding in preliminary conversations that they probably still intend to do that. Many of the eligible small cities shown in the map in orange will be eligible in this round under the new planning program, the Small Communities Planning Program that Merritt will talk about, or based on revised grant criteria. The eligible communities under the general grant criteria were shown in green on this map, and those will shift somewhat based on the criteria that we're working through with you all right now. Probably shift from larger cities to small and medium cities with financial constraints. As you can see in 2040, the Thrive grants primarily served the rural and suburban communities. Merritt will walk you through the assessment. I'll come back at the end.
Yes, hello. For those of you who are new, nice to meet you. I'm Merritt Clapp-Smith, Senior Planner, and I am the Sector Representative for Districts 10 and Districts 12. So, happy to be here. So now we'll talk about what we learned in the 2040 Plan Update Cycle from our grant recipients and observations. First, grant assistance is greatly appreciated by everybody. There's a wide range of effort and expense that communities put into plans, even among very similar types of communities. And this can depend on whether a community thinks that they really need to have a very expansive effort, thinking about their own future and engaging a lot of people. In that case, they may spend quite a bit doing their update. Other communities feel like they've already been kind of doing that work and they're looking at kind of a more basic update from the last time around. So we see quite a bit of variation in the costs. The grants only cover a portion of those costs, but we see that the smallest communities last time were the ones that were least likely to exceed their grant for their overall budget by very much, and that's probably related to their limited capacity to do so. Each planning cycle, we reconsider our grant criteria for assistance to determine which communities have the greatest need. To help us consider this, I spoke with planners who worked with many different types of communities during the 2040 cycle. And the answers they gave in thinking about where the greatest need might be for our assistance were very consistent. They identified population and financial capacity as the biggest determinants of need. Population is key because the larger a community is, the more planning and engineering staff it has, staff who can do a lot of the comprehensive planning work, whereas very small communities have very few staff, if any, other than a part-time clerk. Financial capacity is the amount of money that may be available to those communities to hire staff or consultants for the work. As I said, very small communities often lack staff, and they also lack the budget to hire, whereas there are some very, very small communities, particularly in the western parts of our region, who are very financially well off, and they probably have the opportunity, if they chose to hire consultants or extra staff for that update. Based on continued observations that very small communities struggle with updating their comprehensive plans, the Met Council has been talking for a couple of years about initiating a new planning assistance program focused on these very small and resource-constrained communities. So a new small communities program is proposed to launch for the 2050 planning cycle, and I'll briefly describe it here. The program would be run through Community Development's local planning assistance group, which would take the technical lead on updating comprehensive plans for 20 to 30 of the smallest communities in the region. We would provide direct professional planning services to the communities to help them update their plans with the goal of reducing what is a very heavy burden for these communities to undertake those updates. The program concept has been discussed in LUAC in January and March, and the committee has strongly supported it to date. The program offers a few benefits beyond direct assistance. First, it should reduce our late plan submittals, as we often find that the most delayed submittals come from those very small communities. It can help improve communication, collaboration, and understanding between Met Council, staff, and those communities. And because we'll be handling a lot of the technical elements of the plan update for those communities, then the local representatives can really focus their time on engagement, the vision for the community, and the priority setting. So let's talk about elements of analysis we've been considering in thinking about how to potentially update our criteria. So the criteria used to determine grant eligibility for 2030 and 2040 cycles were first net tax capacity of a community compared to the region's median net tax capacity. In 2030, this was just a flat amount for the community, but in 2040, they decided to make that criteria measured per capita. So if you have a community, you could have two communities with the same tax base but very different population. And I think the thought was, you can spend a lot of money kind of per capita with your financial resources. So they really wanted to move to using a per capita as a metric. The next criteria that's been used is the 30-year population growth rate that was used during the 2040 planning cycle. And this was in consideration of, the growth rate, that really fast-growing communities might have a lot more work to do in updating their plans. And so there was a criteria that faster-growing communities, that would bump them up in their eligibility. They also looked at current population, and then finally, the consortium planning approach that Angela referred to for the 2 counties or 5 or more communities working collaboratively. I just want to mention that the criteria for the consortium approach says 5 or more communities working together. What we've seen in practice is it's been done in these Dakota County's communities that are in a rural setting, and they're very near one another, so they have a lot of similar issues. And I think that really is kind of the intent of the consortium approach, and so I think we might want to consider clarifying that more in the criteria itself, that it would be 5 or more communities in proximity in a rural setting. So that's something for this group to consider. There have been 3 elements we've looked at in thinking about the assistance. First, who needs the help? Under statute, as mentioned, we need to think about demonstrated need and financial constraints. Second, we've been trying to simplify the options, so I think you'll remember from the January LUAC meeting when we came, there were very complicated tables and considering a lot of different choices, and really tried to consolidate the options to be considered. And to make sure there wasn't overlap in eligibility between the grants that we're looking at and the small communities program. And finally, we have been analyzing how updating the criteria would impact different types of communities, and we'll talk that through today. So here's what we've been discussing with LUAC. We also did do a presentation at Community Development Committee and updated them recently on kind of your conversations and what we're discussing for a shift in the criteria. So what you see in orange were the criteria that were used in 2040. The first was looking at the smaller communities under 5,000. If they had a net tax capacity per capita that was less than 125% of the metro median. That was one way to be eligible. The second was if they had a 30-year growth rate that was higher than the metro median, and a net tax capacity per capita equal to or less than 100%. What we're talking about with you at this point is shifting those criteria for grants. First, to look at populations between 2,500 and just under 15,000. And that would be kind of our new category of smaller
Okay,
ones.
quick question, when would that be calculated by, like,
We calculate the data based on the most currently available.
as
So-
of like when 2050 plan kicks into place, or?
We use the most currently available current population. So right now that data set is from 2023.
Okay.
If by the time we publish our eligibility list, we have more current data, we'll use that. The same is true for net tax capacity.
Gotcha.
That is deed data from 2024. I've been kind of watching the data set to see if they'll update it. If they do, then we'll use that more current data.
Gotcha, thank you.
So for the small and medium communities, we would again be using that tax capacity per capita equal to or less than 125% of the metro median. And then for the larger cities, we would again use net tax capacity per capita equal to or less than 100% of the metro median. What you can see here though is that we have put a cap on the upper limit of current population for communities eligible. So this would mean that communities that have a population higher than 35,000 would not be eligible for grants under these proposed changing criteria. For the small communities program, we're benchmarking, again, kind of a shift. The smaller the community, a little bit larger their net tax capacity per capita might be. So for cities under 500 population, their net tax capacity would be equal to or less than 175%. If they're between 500 and 999, it would be equal to or less than 150%. And for those between 1,000 and 2,500 population, it would be less than 125%.
Can I just use that middle one? That's for the planning grants, is that right? And
Right, so the light blue would be for the planning grants for this time around. And the dark blue would be for the new small communities program, the eligibility.
Thank you.
So this table compares eligibility criteria, number of communities served between the 2040 criteria and proposed 2050 criteria and the new small communities program. So I just kind of walked through this with you a bit on the last slide. What I would like to highlight is that the number of communities that would be eligible this time around with our current data, if we use the 2040 criteria from last time, there would now be 63 communities that would be eligible. The proposed set of criteria have been designed such that they're hitting that same mark. So there would again be 63 communities eligible under this proposed change in criteria. And we would continue with the same criteria for the county and consortium. So we know we'd have at least 2 counties and possibly 1 or more consortiums, probably just 1. And then the small communities program, at this point where we've indexed the criteria, we're finding that there would be 30 communities that would be eligible. I should quickly say for our new folks here, nobody is obligated to take a grant or to be in the small communities program. So once we confirm the criteria and identify an eligibility list, those communities are contacted. We talk to them about the program, what it would entail, and then they can decide whether to participate. And I believe that 2040, everybody that got a grant participated in the program. We don't know for the small communities program if it will be the same or if some might feel a little bit unsure about having their plan update kind of done in-house by the council, but we're hoping that they'll mostly see it as a relief.
Can I clarify, so the 63 number being the same in both, so there were no cities over 35,000 that met the metro median and the NDC and population growth factors?
did you ask if there are communities over 35,000 population?
Yeah, because that cutoff didn't exist in the previous one.
Correct, that would be a new cutoff. And the reason for that cutoff is that what we heard from a lot of planners experienced with cities and communities of very different sizes is that these larger communities tend to have a lot of staff in place already. They have planning staff, they have engineering staff. They also have budgets that are much larger than medium and smaller communities. So the added cost of a comprehensive plan update, you know, compared to their overall city budget is pretty small relative to, say, you know, some of these small places where they don't have that big a city budget to begin with.
Yeah, okay, and that rationale makes sense to me. I'm just like curious of the number of communities eligible. So there are no cities over 35,000 that would have been the criteria.
If we didn't, in this case, this does not include cities over 35,000. So if we were to look at cities over 35,000 and their net tax capacity per capita, what we would find is a number of those larger cities do have lower net tax capacity per capita than 100%. Particularly if we're thinking about St. Paul and Minneapolis or some of the inner ring suburbs, they tend to have a lower net tax capacity per capita. And I should add, in both 2030 and 2040, and I think even previously, there was already a criteria. I don't know if I'd call it criteria, but essentially we didn't consider cities of the first class for grants. So Minneapolis and St. Paul have never been in the running, even though they do have more limited tax capacity per capita.
Thanks.
Just to clarify too, I think from the January discussion, I seem to remember that the 63 number is the same number, but the actual communities within that don't 100% match up. So that's the other piece that might not have been clear.
Absolutely, and thank you, that is a great segue to our charts. So after January discussion, LUAC said, all right, we kind of want a little bit more analytics, like if you change these criteria, who's in, who's out. So I have 4 charts here I will share with you, and each of them looks at kind of a different aspect of coverage. So in this first chart here, you will see how the shift in criteria from 2040 to 2050 would impact communities based on their designation. So what you see in orange in each of these charts is the percentage of communities within a certain designation that would be eligible under 2040 criteria. In light blue, you see how many would be eligible if we updated the criteria for 2050 for grants. And in dark blue, you see what percentage would be eligible under the small communities program with the criteria. So what you see in this one, for example, is that the same or more communities would get assistance across all designations in 2050 with significant improvement in service to agricultural, rural residential, and urban edge communities. Here we see assistance based on current population. Service significantly improves to communities with populations under 500 and those with populations between 5,000 and 25,000. Communities with population over 35,000 would no longer be eligible for grants. In this, we look at how communities are served based on their net tax capacity per capita. More communities are eligible in 2050, except those with net tax capacity per capita over 175%. You can see that the small communities programs serves very small communities with higher net tax capacity per capita than was served under the 2040 planning grants, with the rationale being that the budget of very small communities are modest relative to the cost of a comprehensive plan update. So they might have enough tax capacity per capita, say of 160% compared to the median. But if their population is only 300 people, that's still not very much money to have on hand for a comprehensive plan update. So that's why we allowed a little higher thresholds for that tax capacity at lower population levels. And finally, here you see how it would serve communities based on their per-year population growth. And again, 30-year population growth under the proposed revisions would no longer be a criteria. But nevertheless, more communities with low growth rates would become eligible. And typically these are urban edge, and some suburban communities that are aging or fiscally constrained. And then service to high growth rate communities declines only slightly and actually increases in the highest growth communities that exceed 35% population growth rate over 30 years. So even though this would no longer officially be a criteria, I think we still see very good service to the higher growth communities. So with that, I may pause for a moment, see if we have questions about that piece before I turn it back to Angela for next steps.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So there are two programs now going from 6th degree community service to 9th grade. Is the bucket of money distributed to these communities? Is it staying the same, or will there be more money to kind of support additional community support?
That is a great question for Angela.
Yes, I'm working on the budget. So we do have a proposed budget between $3.5 and $4 million that is much larger than the last time, which was I think around 1.9 million. That's because we're serving 30 additional communities, but also because there's a oh my God, inflation. I was like interest, that's not the right word. Inflation over the past 10 decade has also increased. And so that is what we're trying to make up for with the higher budget, but a significant part of the budget that we have set aside currently that we're planning, the council hasn't adopted the budget, so let's be clear about that. It will go for engineering services for the small communities program, because that is really one of the largest costs of comp plan updates, especially for small communities that have to do surface water management plan, water supply plan, those kinds of things, which are perhaps required by a different entity, but also required as part of the comp plan update.
And I'll add, so if our budget is going up kind of to be adjusted for inflation, if that works out, then for instance, a community last time, the very small communities were eligible for $10,000 grants. You know, maybe this time it means that level is $13,000 or $14,000. But once we fix our criteria and we fix the budget, then we go through and kind of work the numbers to make sure that we're spending all the money that we have available and kind of scaling what those levels will be.
Yeah, and I'll add too that the planning assistance grant program is non-competitive, which is why we usually have 100% prescription to the program. And so that's why we also back into the numbers for the budget as far as the award amount. What we have committed to is not less than the last time. And so some of the grant ranges that you saw in previous slides kind of give you the extent of what that range might be. We don't want to provide less than, but also the program has never been intended to provide full funding for the planning process. It's just never been intended to this. It's intended to provide assistance and to offset some of the costs, but not all of the costs.
So I have a question, I love data.
That's why we're here.
Can I assume if you qualify for a small communities, you wouldn't be qualifying for the planning, right? So it's not both. It's interesting to look at your data and say Yep, I think you called it, it's so easy to see urban edge and rural residential seem to be benefiting from your criteria updates, especially. It's interesting to see all these dark blues and where the small communities really are gonna be benefiting from the new program, so that's really great to see. One question on your last graph, the small communities, the dark blue on the last tower, where your population grows over 35%. It doesn't assume a number of growths, so you could still be a very small community that had a massive growth, but it didn't take you into the next category, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, let me say this. The size is based on current population. So if their current population is 480 and they're growing by 35% over 30 years, they're still eligible.
Right.
Because it's based on current population.
Okay.
So it seems like from the criteria, the benefit accrues, or there's more eligible communities in sort of that medium population growth range that otherwise had not been eligible before. And then likewise, current population, sort of those medium population communities also seem to be, more of them are now eligible. And we're still covering some of the other communities with the new small community programs. So it seems like we're expanding the universe of eligible communities, which is, I think, the objective.
Yeah, it'll, so if we are comfortable today, you know, kind of with saying, all right, we think these criteria are pretty good, now we wanna start to see what it really looks like, then the next step would be we'd actually, you know, bring back a list and a map to this committee in July to say this is what it looks like. So if you think back on that 2040 map, there's kind of a donut hole of service all around the edges. In the middle, there wasn't much that happened in the way of grants or support. And so you'd probably see a different kind of a look for the map under these proposed criteria. So.
Can I ask a question about the eligible costs that would be covered by this? Earlier you had talked about technical assistance from Met Council. Is the quantification the value of Met Council's assistance, or is it that cities can hire a consultant or allocate staff time and it covers that as well?
Okay, so technical assistance from the Met Council has, except for these financial programs, is not gonna change. We have sector representatives, we will still serve every community. We have like technical resources, like a local planning handbook and webinars and training programs. Those are eligible to everyone. Those other programs that we provide technical service through, technical assistance through don't change. The fiscal programs are a little different. Obviously, there is a limit to what we can do. I forgot the rest of the motion.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Did we answer all of it, or what?
I don't think I did.
If the city applies for a grant and receives a certain dollar amount,
Oh, what are the eligible expenses?
that dollar amount can fund them hiring a consultant?
Yes. So any cost, generally, we do have a pretty simple work plan that they need to submit to us. They need to kind of identify, they can use it for engagement, they can use it for anything related to their comprehensive plan update. That's the constraint, and if that's hiring an engineer, if that's hiring a consultant, planning consultant, we don't put any bounds on that. We like to know what they spent their money on, and they do have to enter into a contract with us. The plan ultimately does have to be in conformance with the regional system plans, consistent with the council's policies, and compatible with the plans of affected jurisdictions. That's the state law anyway, but we also put that in the contract language to make sure.
And the contracts are pretty straightforward. We try not to make it be a burden to receive the grant. So for instance, awardees are not having to submit receipts for how they spent the money and whatnot. I mean, if they enter into the contract and commit to playing kind of their part in it, then they are awarded the money and then that just goes towards their efforts.
Yeah, what we typically do is issue the first half of the grant up front, and then after their local plan has been authorized by the council and locally adopted, then we, after they submit like their final work plan to us, which is really just an accounting of this is what we ended up spending it on, then we issue the final payment and close out the contract.
And I believe you said it's a non-competitive, so there's no specific criteria where you would weigh one over another in terms of how that community has opportunity to advance the council goals or anything like that.
The criteria that we're looking at is the stuff we're talking about here. That's the only criteria, is you're either eligible or you're not. It's a kind of yay or nay. And you're eligible for one program or you're not. Usually people prefer the money, so they take the grants.
All right, okay.
On slide 15, if you could go back, the smaller communities are now just kind of eligible for the small communities planning program and not grant money. Have you done any engagement with these smaller communities on how they feel about the Met Council, like doing their plan for them, or what kind of engagement you need in the process?
Yeah, that, it's a great question, and I have talked to a number of small communities kind of theoretically about the program. And I've also talked to consultants that work with some of these small communities. And what I hear from the communities is, oh, that sounds like that could be kind of nice. And again, these are where you're going to the community and it's like they've got a half-time clerk and the people who are the elected officials are also filling potholes and, shoveling the front walk. I think, but often they might have a consultant that they can call if they have an official zoning matter or something like that. So I think some of the consultants felt like, well, what if they want to use us and they want to spend, money to have us come in? And I think our thought is, we're focusing on doing an update that meets all of our minimum requirements. We're still looking for those communities to really take a lead on their engagement, their priority setting and whatnot. So I think there's still room for them to be hiring consultants or doing some of those leading roles. So I think we're hoping that people who find out they're eligible will feel good about entering the program, but I think part of our design moving forward is making sure that the way we're describing the respective roles is very respectful of what those communities want to be in the driver's seat on. And that they're like, yeah, we don't need to create a bunch of tables and charts. Like, that's not what we're about anyway. So you guys go for it.
Mm-hmm. What we've also observed is that it is the smallest communities that are eligible for that program, right? And they even have trouble completing their plans with a grant. So that's the communities that we're targeting for that small communities planning program, is the ones that had a hard time even executing a single grant contract with us, let alone hiring multiple consultants to do different things. Right. And so we're really expecting that they would feel relieved that yes, they'll still get to make the decisions and lead the process, but we're here as the planning consultant to help you get it done.
We certainly anticipate not everybody will sign up, and so that's why we sort of talk about 20 to 30 communities we might serve. We're aiming to get about 30 eligible, and we'll have staff that are working on these plans. If we end up at the lower end, then I think what we'll find is that we can provide a little bit more support than maybe we did in the past to communities that aren't officially in the program but are struggling with certain things. So we just sort of augment what we're able to do for other people if it's a little lower level.
Yeah. I will say too that in some of these communities we're already serving in this role unofficially. We do maps for them if they need something updated. We're like, this language would meet the requirement. if you send that back to me, we're good. And so there's a little bit of that already happening. This formalizes our ability to provide that level of service to communities though. And I guess I can only speak to, I'm a veteran, so I've been the council for over about 12 years now, I think. So I was here for the last round, and so we worked through all of these issues with those local governments that we're talking about for the small communities. I remember. Any other questions?
Yes, you can have that.
Okay, so for the timeline and next steps, the plan is to continue with additional discussions throughout the summer with a planned recommendation to the CDC in September. We do plan to go back to the CDC in August, just to give them an update to make sure that they're understanding that the work is continuing and that they still have a good pulse on what's happening. But we'll do that prior to any formal recommendations from this committee. That will give us time to incorporate any additional feedback from the CDC. If they have any kind of new feedback, something that maybe goes in a different direction, we'll be able to respond to that. When we went in May, earlier this month, they didn't shift us into a different direction, and so we feel good so far about where the conversation is evolving. We're hoping that LUAC would make a recommendation to the CDC in September, the CDC would make a recommendation to the council, and then the council would consider adoption of program eligibility in early October. We know how busy the end of the year gets, and so we don't want this to be one more thing that gets diluted in the conversations with all of the other kind of end of year budgetary and other issues that always happen at the end of the year. In December, the council adopts the unified budget, and that's when the funds for these programs will be solidified. We're already starting those budget conversations at CDC this month, and so we do have a plan. We did tell the CDC when we were there a couple weeks ago that we're working with budget and finance folks, and that we do have a plan for funding the program. We just need to start talking about that with them, and then they'll give us direction and provide feedback on that. So we are really trying to solidify the program criteria well before the end of the year. We also need to make sure that we have a program guide ready in early 2026, because even though it's a non-competitive program, we still have to issue a notice of funding availability that officially opens up the application period for local governments. We do keep that application period open for quite some time. Anytime a local government wants to enter into a contract, we have to have a resolution and local adoption of any actions, and so we want to give them plenty of time to have conversations and take local action to participate in the program. We do know this is a tentative schedule, might be ambitious. We'll see how the decision making goes along the way. But this schedule really sets us up to be able to hire staff for the program in Q2 and Q3 of 2026. So I just wanted to,
Just a reminder, if I'm not mistaken, system statements go out in September?
That's correct. So after the adoption, look at you, Bill. You know your
Last
stuff.
meeting, test.
So the Regional Development Guide Imagine 2050 was adopted in February, and statutorily, we have to issue system statements following any changes to our regional system plans and policy plans. What we do, system statements are really kind of telling local governments what has changed, what are our system plans and policy plans now, what has changed for your community, and how you are expected, those local governments are expected to respond to the changes in regional policy. system statements just start the kickoff. It's really the kickoff to the local comprehensive planning process, because system statements will tell the community what they have to respond to, but communities spend 2 years or more doing that local engagement, visioning and values and priority setting, strategies, whatever the local planning issues are, things that are important to local governments. They spend an incredible amount of time doing a comp plan update. And so system statements in September, as Bill mentioned, is just the kickoff. And then it just, we go into further implementation of some of our technical assistance and resource, our tool development, and we work with local governments throughout the whole process. Like I said, this is just two of our technical assistance suite of resources. Any other questions on the timeline?
I do have a question on the communication that we spoke at the last meeting. Is because of the changes we're going to be making, some of the communities that were eligible won't be, and I thought that was what we kind of highlighted was where we wanted to make sure those communications went out, with the system statements going out in September, and then, but yet, the Met Council isn't getting this till December. What kind of communication is going to be going to this meeting?
The system statements aren't tied to the
Correct,
funding.
but that's going to really start thinking about this process in the community's minds. So if we don't have this criteria done yet, how do we work in that communication?
Okay. Normally, we would want to establish the criteria first. In every round, the communities that are eligible shifts, just because population changes, net tax capacity changes, we get current numbers, some people fall in or out of eligibility. The council is responsible for establishing the criteria, and we're talking about what is need, what is the fiscal constraints, which is set in statute. The council has to identify that first. We will fully have those conversations with local governments. The council usually, it's kind of an order of operations. The council has to make some decisions first. We have to know how much funding we have available, who will or won't be eligible, and then we have those communications and we work through with communities that aren't eligible anymore on how we will still be able to provide services. With our local planning handbook, we generally try to provide everything that would meet as best we can. Some local decisions obviously impact some things, but to meet minimum requirements, we try to provide all of the maps that might be necessary for that, all of the directions and guidelines that help local governments make decisions on density and land use and where this and when this, those land use policy decisions are kind of the biggest unknown as local governments are shifting their priorities. Go ahead.
We have a sector reps been, talking to communities about the upcoming process, and people have been asking about grant possibilities, and we've been saying, by the end of this year, we'll have identified the eligible communities. But as a matter of kind of public information, anything that we send to this group, for instance, is public, and so it will, we will have kind of proposed criteria and a possible list of eligible communities that will be coming forward this summer. And then in September, so I think communities can start to get a sense if they might be in or out, and kind of tracking those conversations at LUAC and CDC if they're interested. But it may be, maybe we should put kind of a placeholder on our website about, when decisions will be made or something.
Well, in addition to that, we have several planning focus groups that we meet with regularly. We have a group with Metro Cities called the Regional Planning Advisory Group, and we meet with them regularly. And all of these front end things go forward to those groups. They will probably have similar things. We'll develop an engagement plan and communications plan to make sure that we're addressing your concerns.
Yeah, it's a good one.
We'll also be at planning conferences. We talk about this with our planning colleagues throughout the region. As like Mayor said, as soon as information is available, we do start sharing those things out. I take your point, communications plan needed,
Yes.
will do.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I have to leave to my next board meeting here that I'm running late to already. Yeah, so, excuse me, yeah.
Thank you for coming. Okay, any other questions on this? So, we do have next steps, the scope of work for local plan updates. We need to inventory kind of key tasks and technical resources to update the plans, including how they might differ by community types. We are looking at identifying the planning and engineering services specifically needed, how many hours of planning time, how many hours of engineering do we estimate those costs to be, so that we know how to staff it and to fund it for those minimum requirements across all of the plan elements. That includes confirming the staffing level and budget, as I mentioned, and developing a communications and outreach plan to engage eligible and ineligible communities. I'll add that, Kathy. And that's for the small communities planning program. Ineligible communities, probably more important for the planning assistance grant program, but we will have a similar program or engagement plan for both. We're still working on confirming eligibility and identifying the grantee communities, again, finalizing the budget, and how that will be distributed to grantees based on the grant levels. The grant levels will come to this committee as well, as far as the actual dollar amounts. We are also considering a few incentive, kind of bonus funding to incentivize community work on certain regional priorities, or for example, submitting plans early. That helps us manage our staff capacity. If a community gets us their plan by X date, perhaps they will get a dollar number, not just $1, but an amount of an increase to their grant fund as well. So we're also accommodating that in our budget as well. Again, communications and outreach, and preparing the program guidelines for the grants, contracts, and our finance folks. So we do also have a few discussion prompts. I think we've had a lot of discussion, but anybody have any other questions? Any of these things kind of prompt an additional question? I do want to ask if there's any other analysis that would be helpful for the committee, in addition to the list and map of communities that will eventually be coming, in order for this committee to feel prepared to make a decision or a recommendation. This is a recommending body, so a recommendation to the Community Development Committee.
I think the thing I asked about in my email that may not have been completely clear at the last meeting I wasn't able to be at. When I think about a program for helping and providing assistance, it's always nice if your cluster of eligible communities is here and your criteria pretty well captures it, and maybe the ineligible ones are out here and there's a nice gap there and your criteria really do a good job of capturing everybody. However, if the communities are all just a continuum all over the place, your criteria just has to be a cutoff. And I just wanted to make sure that we're attentive to the notion that if we're like just about capturing the whole population of possible communities, but if we shifted our criteria by 5% on net tax capacity or something, we get 2 more in that otherwise wouldn't have been eligible, but we can handle that with the program. That was what I was trying to get at, is I just want to make sure that if there is that sort of obvious line where if you just shifted a criteria a little bit, somebody who really ought to be eligible can get in, but if it's a situation where it's just all over the place, that you can't really do that. So I just wanted to have a better sense of that going into the final decision making, if that's possible to kind of demonstrate or quantify or show.
Yeah, it is hard, like you say, data's on a continuum, so like population, it's just sort of, it is
Yeah, I was
continuous.
trying to combine
and
the
so,
criteria together and seeing if you get clusters. Yeah.
I did do a lot of, to get to where we're at right now, I did a lot of different criteria and combinations of criteria, kept looking at the set of communities that were coming up, and then I'd be like, this seems like we're missing some that we shouldn't be missing, and I tweak it again. So there was a lot of that that went into what's in front of us, but we can continue to look at sort of, are there a couple people on the cusp that if we tweaked it a little bit, they'd suddenly be in and it's a more obvious breaking point, we can certainly continue to look at that.
And I certainly don't want staff to spend hours and hours and hours on that for marginal benefit, but I just wanted to make sure at least that you had a comfortable sense of that I could also feel comfortable about going forward in the decision.
Yeah.
Thank you. You can do that.
I have a question, and this speaks to my lack of knowledge. So you're going to make in September, the statements go out. In January, the information about the program is available, and in June, you start your selection process or your when is the actual planning process duration? Does it start in 2026? And it goes, we have till 2027, or the execution of actually our comp plans? What's that time frame?
Comp plans are due to the council in years ending in 8. So they are issued system statements, statutorily deadline, directed deadline, and that falls in September of this year. There is a certain period of time where communities can contest their system statement. A lot of that is internal negotiations. A lot of that's around forecasts, to be honest with you. But they can formally also object to their system statement, and there's a defined process for that as well. Once that process concludes, that's by the end of this year, so it's a 90-day total period there. So communities can submit their comp plans anytime after they receive their system statement, so long as their plan is responsive to the system statement. Like I said, it usually takes communities several years, which is why we issue them, gives them 3 years to complete their plan. They're due December 31st of 2028. I will say in the last round, the council did authorize an extension to that deadline, which assisted the planning grant communities because otherwise they have to meet the deadline as well. And so they were eligible for an extension to not only their grant contract, all communities were, whether they were in any grant program or not, were offered a year extension as well. I would assume we'll see what the pacing is this year, this go round, but council is very generous with that. There's also no penalty for a community that doesn't submit their plan unless they want any of the council's incentives, grant dollars, LCA funds, for example. Communities have to be, not only do they have to have a current 2050 comp plan at that point, but they also have to be consistent with all of our policies and in conformance with all of our system plans.
And I assume it's an iterative process. We might submit a draft, and then there's a review and approval. Is it December 31st, 2028? Is that approval also by Met Council has to be complete by then?
Like I said, we're very generous with it. As long as they submit their plan to us by December 31st of 2028. However, and this happened in the last round and the previous round, most plans have more than one iteration. Comp plans are very comprehensive, right? And it's a process that happens only once every 10 years. One of our engagement folks, a local planner, mentioned just recently, it's very hard to be an expert at something you do once every 10 years. And that's completely understandable. There are also a lot of factors that don't fall in the community's control. The DNR approves things like a critical area plan, or the surface water management plan, and watersheds are involved in that. The water supply plan is the DNR. And so there's a lot of other things that go into just a comprehensive. It's not just the land use plan, for example. It's not just talking about affordable housing. It is kind of the full breadth of things that the local government could be addressing, and so it does take quite a lot of time. So just submit it, and then we'll work through everything else together.
I would say it's a great opportunity, especially at the city level, to educate, engage the public and educate. And if you look at Minnesota data, or I'll say specifically Dakota County, we have 15.3% 65 and older, and it'll be 23 at 40 to 45. So that housing need demographic is significantly changing in the next 20, especially by 2050. When you look at, we just did a housing study by our CDA last year. So we have 100,000 people inflowing into the county, 143 go out every day. But we do have that down at the city data, so incorporating Met Council data, some housing data from your housing authority, it's a great time to engage, especially again with that affordability. In Burnsville, for example, 51% of the renters are cost burdened at 30%, 23% of the households. So just sharing that, everyone knows the price of housing went up, but it sort of explains why the density number isn't such a bad thing once you start looking at these people that need to be in zero entry type living units. But anyway, there's all kinds of info, etc.
I will just share feedback and recognizing that I'm a little biased since I'm just over the limit in Richfield, over 37,000. But I guess I do. Yeah, I think Roseville's in exactly the same situation. Obviously the cutoff has to be somewhere. I will just share though, like I observed our comp planning process as a planning commissioner last time, and although we did have the money to create a plan that met the Met Council's minimums, it wasn't a very good plan, and well, maybe we shouldn't say that on the record, but it could have done a lot more. It could have been a lot more ambitious, and I was told by staff that cost was a major factor. They wanted to do the minimum consultant cost they possibly could to update the plan and make it meet the new standards. It didn't involve a deep sort of look at what the community could. It didn't really guide future development any more than it absolutely had to, and cost was the reason. So I don't know how you design a program that incentivizes people to go above and beyond versus just reducing what they were going to put in from their city money. But I do think even cities over 35,000 do benefit from that. I think on a very large scale, Minneapolis' 2040 plan compared to the previous plans was much more ambitious, and I would love more suburbs to take an approach like that.
I think we were talking about this, so Angela and other staff that were here that reviewed the 2040 plans and then saw kind of the estimates of what people spent on plans from just a Met Council perspective, didn't necessarily see that people who spent more had, their plans were that much better by the amount they spent. But that a lot of what goes into the expense of a plan can be about what the community feels it needs. So does it need a really high level of engagement? Does it need to do a lot of update of its engineering services? And so that's why I think we see so much variation in what communities spend on their plans. But to do the elements of the plan that meet kind of the Met Council minimum requirements, that in and of itself might not drive a high budget. It's kind of like, what is everything else the community really wants to get for its own purposes from the plan? I don't know if you want to add anything.
Point taken, we understand. We have technical resources and assistance in various other ways, just not financial, for communities to get more out of your plan is kind of how we have branded it in previous rounds. We do try and provide professional development opportunities free of charge for all of our regions, local planning staff. We held a free conference last time to help get familiarity with all of the planning requirements. Oftentimes, if you can spend less time worrying about the planning requirements because you understand them and they're clear and they're already either in line with what you want to do or you're already doing them. A lot of communities are already doing a lot of the things that are minimum requirements, especially communities like Richfield. So if you can spend less time worrying about meeting some of that minutia, not minutia, it's very important, don't get me wrong, it's very important, don't get me wrong. Some of those other things that may be less importance to the local government, to the residents of your community, we hope that we can lighten the load in that way.
Okay, thank you.
This might be covered by what the formulas come out and what the eligibility list ends up being, but was there any consideration given to the cities or the type that the designations, I guess it is, that had the increased density, suburban edge, I believe it was this past from 2040 to 2050? Because that's kind of creating, I know in my area, there's a number of cities that are like that, that's gonna be a pretty significant change that's kind of forced on the city to change in their plan. Is there any consideration in this grant for that, or this program for that?
Yeah, largely we're looking at kind of criteria used in the past and whether to use or adjust those. And so that hadn't been the type of criteria in the past. I think looking at the changes to minimum density, they're happening across a number of different designation levels. So a lot of communities will be experiencing that same thing where the numbers they had last time are different than what they'll be looking at this time. So my sense is it's a shared adjustment.
Gotcha.
But across many types of communities.
All of the densities, with the exception of the rural service area, increased for all of the community designations, which is why we didn't do an analysis for the eligibility criteria based on that.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Just a side note, have you clarified how densities are calculated with wetlands, storm basins?
That's also on our work plan for this year. So when we were doing the regional development guide, there was a lot of conversation about what's in a density calculation, what's excluded from a density calculation. And part of what we need to do to respond to Metro 2050 is to update those guidelines, update any of our resources that explain how to calculate density. And some of that is analysis of stormwater management areas. One of the biggest things that will help a large majority of communities with new density expectations in the developing edge areas is an update to our plat monitoring program, which has a shorter look back period. Right now, the current program timeline is like either whenever the community enrolled, some of which went back to the year 2000. And so the development pattern in 2000 is much different than the development pattern today. And so communities that are enrolled in that plat monitoring program will have a significant shift in their calculations based on that. We're also looking at adding permanent public easements as something that we would exclude from density calculations. That's feedback that we heard and that is consistent with our analysis during the planning process.
If I may, permanent public easement, what does that mean?
So those stormwater areas, for example, that are owned permanently has an easement. So right now, the requirement is that it has to be publicly owned areas. But a lot of communities do that same sort of preservation of areas from development through a permanent public easement. It's still the responsibility of the public agency, so the local government. It's not in private ownership, but it expands what we are allowing to be excluded from density.
So some cities ran their lot lines in the middle of the pond, and the city maintains the water, but it's owned by the private person. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's still owned by, if it's owned privately, no. But largely what happens is with new subdivisions,
Okay.
and when they're platting, they are identifying stormwater areas. And those areas that are held in permanent public easement or in public outlots, which is another method that local governments use, those areas would be potentially eligible for being excluded. Right now, it's just public ownership, but easements can serve the same function.
That
we don't measure
decision
out
could
to-
affect developments.
Hopefully positively, because they're being allowed to
Do you
explain further
understand what
here.
I mean?
Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, I think we talked about as we're developing this, that we were gonna, invite a little bit of input, and I think we might have a volunteer.
Well, those guidelines, any revisions that we do would come to this meeting as well. That's why I said it was part of this year's work plan. I know.
Any other questions? No? Everyone's looking forward to going home then? Alright, meeting is adjourned.
I know, I just wanna